There follows the last interview John Pope gave to me. I apologise in advance for the poor quality of the recording done on a small cassette. However, this interview from October 1987 has certainly some historic importance, and I offer it now. What day is it? Sunday?
Yes.
11:39 on Sunday the 18th of October 1987. And your full name is?
John Russell Pope D. Locksley.
Is that it?
That is my full name, leaving out my 91 titles.
Right. Now, the period I'm interested in for purposes of the publication, the book indeed, that I'm working on at present, is the period from 1973, when you first appeared on the scene in Highgate. When was that, and how did it happen?
Well, it was shortly after I returned from my holiday in Gibraltar, which I believe was in August or September of 1973. And I believe that I met David Farrant, must have been the beginning of October.
Or indeed September?
Yes. I know it was sometime before Halloween, anyway.
It would have had to have been. It would have to be significantly before Halloween, because by then you had a very strong liaison, an association, which would have had to have developed in some period of time.
Yes.
So it does suggest to me that it would be nearer to September.
Yes.
Because if we can go along to that, Halloween, that was the year 1973, when Farrant gave an interview to the Hornsey Journal at the end of August and claimed responsibility for a blood sacrifice at Highgate Wood, explaining that hundreds of years ago a naked virgin would have been the sacrifice, but now he's substituted that with a cat. He claimed to be a stray one.
I think I first went and met David Farrant directly after the newspaper article, which was included him as being the cat killer, Martin de Sacy.
That was in the News of the World, their investigation of...
And the story of the McGeester,
that's
set fire to the picture on the wall.
That would be the News of the World investigation on the 23rd of September.
Or in which case it must have been 24th or 25th of September.
So that's the Martine de Sacy story, where she claimed to have witnessed various witchcraft ceremonies in the company of David Farrant. That appeared on the 23rd of September 1973. So you're suggesting then that you made your first communication with Farrant in person, at least, shortly thereafter?
Yes.
Which would have been the 24th or 25th of September?
So, yes.
Right. When Halloween approached, however, you either were invited or decided to turn up to take part in some sort of ritual. This is as was reported in the Hornsey Journal.
Yes.
However, Farrant himself, although he'd repeated to sacrifice yet another cat at the same location, Highgate Wood, on this occasion he was outsmarted, it would appear, by the police, who had been alerted by national newspaper reports and indignant captains. And he
Roger Simpson.
and Farrant in fact didn't turn up at Highgate Wood, but you did.
Farrant, we met up first outside of his place, and he brought with him the lady who I used to know in the Salvation Army, who explained how she'd been there.
What was her name?
I forget now.
Was it Helen?
Yes, I believe it was. But
and you knew Helen, and Farrant knew Helen?
Oh yes, I've known her for years.
And Farrant had some previous association with Helen,
yes.
Whom he was describing at the time as a medium.
Well, she told me she ran an occult circle in Barnet for many years, and that Farrant had been a member of her occult group. That's
Right.
what she told me.
However,
And the two of them did go up to Highgate Woods, but they were unable to get in
this was due to what?
due to too much police involved.
The police presence
Mm.
prevented them from getting in. However, one person who did arrive at the scene was John Pope, who was reported in the Hornsey Journal, 9th of November 1973, as telling police, and I quote, that he had gone into a trance and ended up at the Wood. That's what was reported in the journal. And the same newspaper, the Hornsey Journal, in that report, which included a photograph of you being interviewed by a policeman at the Wood, where it would appear a statement is being taken there. It's a photograph of a policeman with his notebook out, and you are speaking to him.
Yeah.
In that same report, it quotes again that Farrant later claimed that the youth, that is John Pope, was a decoy, and that he was a crank hanger-on to the coven. And later on in the same quote, Farrant goes on to say that a cat was sacrificed elsewhere, but declined to give any further information.
Well, I said that these reports in the paper are complete nonsense, because I was there when Farrant made the statement to the reporter who came back with this.
No, well, this was probably
day or 2 days after.
This was probably information gleaned either by telephone or in person at a later date. This report was a whole week later.
Mm.
And
that's from the Hornsey Journal.
Yes, and they would have.
From them have reported what allegedly took place at Highgate Woods, involving the policeman and myself.
Well, there is in that newspaper a photograph of you actually giving a statement to the police.
Yes, but what they said about me claiming to be in a trance and all that's complete nonsense, because it isn't anything of the sort.
But there is little doubt, however, they've actually got Farrant quoted as saying that you were a decoy. To lead the police.
Well, so what they've already claimed I'm supposed to have said, and what the police said is inaccurate, and whatever they claim Farrant said might equally be just as inaccurate.
So they've got the whole thing wrong from beginning to start?
Oh yes, they have. Yes, it was totally, completely different. At that time I spoke on the radio, there were radio people there at the Woods. And,
yes, but you've got to understand that it's very likely that they wouldn't have even spoken to Farrant on that night at all. They would have spoken to him on his own.
Yes.
Probably at a later date, probably the following week, because Farrant was not available in the first place, so that he would have hardly been able to give a report, an interview there or there. And it's more likely that they rang him back, as they tend to do on this occasion. They rang him back several times, verifying things. He's any points that they want to raise, they would ask him, and it's unlikely that they would have reported something like that unless he would have said something very similar, because it would have been far better had they, from their point of view, to have said something different.
Yes.
At the time, because I remember the thing being raised, Farrant didn't deny it.
Well, there's no truth in him being able to perform cat sacrifice anywhere else, because as soon as he wasn't very far away, and I don't think they realised he was there, and I knew where he was, and I was able to return to his place afterwards, and he was there. And I knew where he was. We met up further down the road actually. There in Heron. All they'd done was walk up the pathways trying to see, and there were still many people around, so they just turned around and went back. But at the time the police and everybody was there, they were hiding under the bridge.
Well,
nobody else turned up. If any of his other members turned up, then they all...
you never actually saw any other
actually
members?
see
You never witnessed any other members?
No.
It would seem that the seeds of Farrant's downfall had already been sown.
Yes, I think Roger Simpson was... He informed
Roger Simpson
to
being...
tip the police off. He was one of the top reporters on the Hornsey Journal.
On the Hornsey Journal. And you feel that the journalist, who had up until then worked very closely in cooperation with Farrant on a number of stories concerning witchcraft.
Yes.
And they had some strange relationship where a number of stories came out very often on the front page of that newspaper to their mutual benefit.
Yes, definitely.
It might be, and I simply pose this, that Farrant overstepped the mark and Simpson got his own back.
Yes.
But Farrant's actual downfall appears to have accelerated in the wake of a front page story in the same newspaper again, the Hornsey Journal, on the 28th of September 73, which carried a 10-inch high picture of him brandishing a ritual dagger in front of an altar with black candles, and a picture of what appears to be a vampire in the back. In the journal's lengthy report, Farrant admits sending effigies transfixed with pins through the post, and boasted of slitting stray cats' throats at the height of bizarre witchcraft rituals. And the previous year he'd been quoted as saying that the practice of sticking pins in dolls was black magic and that it played no part in his witchcraft. However, he was now admitting doing it. Amongst these, to receive witchcraft effigies or voodoo dolls or whatever they happen to be, but these clay, I think they were, dolls with pins stuck in the heads and the heart. Amongst these recipients were two detectives. The end was indeed in sight for David Farrant. However, these particular detectives had already interviewed yourself. And
that's jumping a bit, that's many years later, isn't it?
It's the following year.
You don't wish to cover the John Baldry episode at this point?
Well, we can go back to that if you like, but just to tie up the doll situation.
The dolls come into the John Baldry run quite a lot, don't they?
Yes, except that it wasn't as a result of Baldry receiving the doll that really accelerated his downfall. It can be argued that it was as a result of the detectives.
Yes.
I'm not sure what police station they were attached to. Do you know?
Well, one detective I think came from Bournemouth and the other one from Hendon. They were not at Barnet and they've been brought in specially. I don't think Barnet wanted to handle the cases, I understand. They were brought in very specially for that.
And in evidence that is now infamous Old Bailey trial the following year, at which he was found guilty, needless to say, it was said that Farrant was trying to influence the detectives' evidence by sending them these dolls so that they would be afraid to testify against yourself on a separate charge.
Well, as I remember at the time, they were supposed to be that it was claimed, especially at the Old Bailey trial later, that the pins had been placed in the mouths of the detectives so they couldn't give evidence, which is untrue, as I saw the dolls when the police first got them. I was asked to go and have a look at them to give my point of view. And one pin was in the penis of the one doll, and there was one in the heart, and then the opposite doll there was a pin in the throat and another pin in the stomach of the doll.
However,
the doll contained the inverted 5-point star and the all-seeing eye of Margaret Weaver.
is it true or not that, as alleged by the prosecution during this trial, that you had been arrested the previous New Year's Eve by these two detectives?
Yes, I had been arrested.
By the detectives that received the dolls from
Oh,
her
yeah.
at a later date?
Yes.
And are you aware of why? We don't need to go into why you were arrested. Were you actually found guilty or not guilty of the charge for which you were arrested?
I was found guilty for the charge I was arrested, but not for the other charges that the police brought.
What was the actual name of the charge that you were found guilty and was proven by the jury?
It was very technical. It wasn't very straightforward at all. Certainly black magic was involved. I was accused of practicing black magic and witchcraft and performing black magic ceremonies.
Could one describe it as sex magic?
There was a lot. They didn't use the term. There was various technical
Did you
terms.
use that term?
No, I didn't want. One of the. It comes under the various. I think in modern books of law they use the term psychic assault for one of them. Certainly. And there's certainly black magic involved under the bridge.
Black magic involved under a bridge?
Yes.
The bridge being where?
In the area of Barnet.
In the area of Barnet? You can't be more precise than that. Anyway, in London Evening News, 3rd of July 1974, along with a photograph of the dolls with the pins in them, was a report which said that the dolls were sent to these detectives by Farrant so that they would be afraid of testifying against a man arrested on an indecency charge.
Well, the dolls were not sent for that purpose. The dolls were sent because the police had already beaten me up, so I got to make a false confession, so they already had written. And the wording, there was a little spell that went with the dolls that said, those who harm the initiated will become a victim of their own intentions. We will return to you before another month is gone, which simply meant that if they did any further harm to me, the spell would be activated.
And did they do further harm to you?
No, they did not.
Was the confession, which you had signed presumably, and you say was made under duress, was that used successfully against you in court?
Well, there was a typed version that contained many things that weren't in the original.
And was that used successfully?
Yes, that was used against me, yes.
And was it successful insofar as were you found to be guilty of whatever the technical name of the charge might be, albeit indecency or whatever?
Yes. Psychic assault is what they basically went on about. There was nothing about psychic assault in the original statement, but the statement was typewritten and shown to me, but it never played a part in their description.
When you were arrested, presumably, were you arrested under the bridge?
Oh no. I wasn't technically arrested. They came here and they searched my room.
How does this business under the bridge come into it? How did anyone know?
This was brought up in court. It was never brought up in the...
presumably you were practicing some sort of ceremony under the bridge?
No, I wasn't. There's water under the bridge. There's stream runs under it. It simply is something that the police concocted.
Had they?
I don't think they've even been there and had a look.
Had there a statement or a witness who claimed something went on under the bridge?
Well, they had somebody, a witness, who claimed that something had gone under the bridge.
And without giving any names or anything, who was the witness and what was the nature of the witness?
A young person from this area, Catholic, who regarded black magic and everything as being against the law.
What was it, a young boy or a young girl?
Well, a young person. So.
You can't say whether it was a boy or a girl?
No, I don't wish to go into the
Okay.
detail.
All right, okay.
It's unnecessary to read.
But anyway, you're quite willing to accept that the dolls were sent on your behalf by Farrant to prevent the detectives putting further pressure on you,
Yes, that's it.
because you say that the detectives had beaten you up.
Yeah.
Or was that New Year's Eve? Or thereabouts?
No, it was before Christmas.
So it was,
Before Christmas, it was late 1973, I think.
it was before Christmas.
Yes.
Just that in the evening news it says the prosecution say that you were arrested on New Year's Eve by these detectives. Is that a mistake?
No, I wasn't. I was arrested before the Christmas. The case was heard in, must be about May, about May or April 1974, but I was arrested in about early December 1973, and the offence supposed to have taken place at least up to a year, if not 2 years before.
Well, it's just a matter of days anyway.
I think the offence was supposed to have taken place when I was about 17 or 18, several years before.
However, during the period of Farrant's lengthy witchcraft trial at the Old Bailey, there was another matter which was raised regarding a charge of arson. This is at the Old Bailey. Where, according to The Sun, on the 7th of March 1974, you and Farrant appeared, as I say, at the Old Bailey on this charge, after starting a blaze in a derelict house at North London. And the court listened to stories of a weird ceremony to raise Pan, and goes on in this report in The Sun to say that you were freed, having had the charge dismissed or been found innocent of the charge, but Farrant remained in custody on other charges. In other words, you were cleared of the arson charge, and Farrant was to remain incarcerated on other charges, having had them proven. Whilst your rise to fame continued.
Yes.
And you were in various places, like Reveille, or was it Titbits? Reveille. You were referred to as Britain's leading black magician, and this again appeared in other places upon Farrant's incarceration.
Yes.
You seemed, as it were, to the public to take over and become the leading Satanist, or whatever the term might be, upon his decline.
Yes. Well, I founded an organisation to be a witches' union to fight for witches or occultists by rights, because I'm not a witch myself.
You are not a witch?
I've never been initiated into Wicca, but I founded this occultist union, and after a year or so a number of them got together and wanted to make me King of the Witches. I pointed out that I was not a witch, so eventually it was put together that I should be called Imperial Toad, which is the English translation of the Babylonian title Belshazzar, and is title of kingship from the symbol of the toad. It's one of the symbols of Bel-Nebo, the son of Bel-Marduk and Ishtar, and therefore I was given this title. There was about 10 or 12 groups, organisations within the Witches' Union, some of them quite famous.
So let me get this straight. Although from circa 73, late September, you were clearly acting in concert with David Farrant of that area in Highgate Wood and various other places like the Derelict House, for example. And Farrant there at that time and subsequently described himself as a high priest of Wicca or witchcraft and an initiated witch himself, and thereby one would conclude with the ability and charge to initiate other witches. So despite your close relationship at that time and inclusion in many ceremonies, rituals and whatever they were, you were never actually offered to be initiated by David Farrant himself.
No, I toyed with the idea and we spoke about it. But
Did he
something
offer?
totally, no, he said it was something totally different, and that a trained occultist, a magician, could not become a witch because witchcraft is a religion, and it is something totally different. And
was it a religion to which you did not subscribe?
yes, I didn't fully subscribe to his beliefs and ideas totally at that time. Certainly I didn't know a great deal about Wicca. I wasn't the least bit interested in Alexander's Gardnerian, because I know most of that to be complete fraud.
And what was his feelings with regard to your beliefs or...
Well, we practiced a lot of Kabbalistic magic as well, and we discussed Kabbalistic magic, and so he had a good idea of that. But
well, I mean, for example, there were many things which you did together. One of the most published and publicised and well known is this matter mentioned in The Sun, 7th of March 74, where you were in court described as performing a ceremony to the god Pan.
oh yes, well, most of that was I sort of made up myself. I sort of
But how could that be described? How would a ceremony of that nature in the Derelict House, with the usual paraphernalia one normally ascribes to black magic, how would that best be described? How would such a ceremony as you were both involved in, would it be a satanic ceremony?
oh no, it's not satanic.
Is it a black magic ceremony?
No, it's not black magic, because it doesn't involve black magic, Satanism or witchcraft.
What exactly is it then, if it's none of these things?
It was closer to being spiritualism, because I entered into trance so that the god Pan could speak through me. Though we did perform a ritual, the first part of the ritual was simply a protection to stop anything evil, from entering the circle in physical form.
In certain places, i.e. magazines such as, I believe, New Witchcraft, I think there were others, a photograph appeared of the two of you in which you are naked. If it was simply a spiritualist experiment, whereby you were acting as a medium through which the demon could come to you, why was it necessary for you to be naked and for Farrant to have a dagger in his hand, and for various witchcraft or whatever black magic symbols to be...
Well, they weren't witchcraft or black magic symbols. Some of them were symbols of the Knight Templars. The circle we used was of the Great White Brotherhood. Other symbols were to do with Crowley, or to do with symbols of Pan himself. And the eight-pointed star of Ishtar was used in the centre of the circle, which is very powerful.
So you would agree then that it was more than a spiritist meeting?
Well, more than the Yogic spiritualist meeting.
What was Farrant doing with a dagger in his hand?
Well, he was invoking the powers of protection to cast the circle.
And why in the picture are you in fact naked?
Well, because it helps to raise various energies sometimes without your clothes. It can assist in various times. I don't use it very often, but it can be very helpful It's like putting on a specialised road. It takes your mind off of the everyday things.
And I believe that out of all this, and as a consequence came the charge of arson, was some fire.
Well, we had a tin plate and some tin foil and about 3 sticks of wood, and we had a flame of about 3 inches, which no way could have set fire to anything, certainly not in a deep tin plate, or a deep tin with sides, which would stop the flame, except it from getting out. And it was completely ridiculous to say we would set fire to anything. In fact, they could never prove that we had burnt anything at all.
In any case, it was the charge, you were cleared of that charge. At the time, the impression from the local newspapers, and indeed the national newspapers, would be that David Farrant was your mentor.
No, this is not so. He was not my mentor, and I didn't even belong to his organisation at all. I ran my own organisation, the Order of the Mystic Path and the Pentagram. I'm an advanced magician, been practising since I was a boy. My grandparents were all involved in the occult. I was trained at an early age. I was involved with yoga and many yoga organisations and with Divine Light Mission. I'd taken knowledge from Mahatma Babaji, and I belong to the International Order of Kabbalists, so my training has been going for many, many years before. I was at least, I crossed the average, I was at least Megista Tempeli at the time. Take part in snake charming and all that sort of thing in Africa, into the Middle East. Study with other people, so.
Nonetheless, having said that you are and have never been a witch, and that these ceremonies such as I've described were not of themselves satanic or black magic, you did form an organisation, did you not, called the United Temples of Satan?
Well, the organisation referring to was the Occultist Union, which was originally founded without name. The name United Temples of Satan was drummed up by Ron Adams, who is a vicar of the Church of Satan in San Francisco, and he started producing papered headings with the slogan at the bottom, Satanic Unity, and passing all these out. It took us a bit of time to get them all back in and to issue our own accepted ones, which became the Pagan Church of Britain.
But you did at the time use letterheaded notepaper which proclaimed at the top United Temples of Satan.
Well, as I say, this paper was produced by Ron Adams. It was never produced by me.
This was in concert, was it not, with the Bar for Britain crusade?
Yes, well, Anthony Binding, Transworld Temple of Ishtar, was one of the organisations that belonged to the Occultist Union, which later became known as the Pagan Church of Britain. And Ron Adams also belonged to numerous other people, such as Marion Unsworth and Dave Marriott, etc. These organisations. Mr. Marriott is at present the outer head of the World Society of Pantheology, which was the new adopted name for the Pagan Church of Britain. But such paper headings and other bits and pieces were put together by Ron Adams off his own back, and which were later withdrawn by us and supplemented with our own accepted ones.
But at the time you freely used the title and term United Temples of Satan, and were frequently quoted as using it. And I must say I received letters myself from you which had United Temples of Satan written across the top, which had been printed by a printing company.
Yes, as I say, it was printed over in Bournemouth by Ron Adams, for Ron Adams, who collected all the paperwork. I never used any paper headings sent out myself by those terms. A lot of the secretarial work at the time was done by Anthony Binding and Ron Adams.
So
they had little rubber stamps and things made up with their own.
You were frequently named in the press, or described in the press, if you like, as a Satanist.
Oh yes, well they always used the term voodoo, Satanism and witchcraft were for you know, anything connected with any other religion.
But there is nowhere on record that I can find, there is no public record where you have disagreed with this.
Oh yes, there is. It became in a magazine called Here's Health, in which it was.
No, but in the wider sense, in the wide press, in the national and the local press, where it was you were frequently described. I mean, there was an article which you called "The Son of the Beast," in which you were described as a Satanist throughout. But there was no point at which you disagreed with that.
Well, I never used any such terms. The papers have always changed whatever I said to them to suit themselves. They have always changed either what's been said to them, or they've made up something completely different. As I always said, that they ignored everything that was they either saw in rituals performed or told, and spent months reading up Dennis Wheatley's books for various satanic and black magic terms which have absolutely nothing to do with what was said to them or what we do.
Would you say that Aleister Crowley was a Satanist?
No, it was nothing to do with Satanism at all. But
would you accept that there are Satanists who use the works of Crowley as a platform?
I'd say that there's devil worshippers and certainly Satanists who use both Crowley and Gerald Gardner's work, certainly Wicca, as a front for other activities.
And you would simply say it's a semantical argument then as to whether to describe someone as a Satanist or a black magician or a witch or a pagan practitioner. It's a question of interpretation. That to some people they would obviously call everything Aleister Crowley did as black magic, whereas somebody else would not. It's a question of interpretation.
In the Middle Ages they often used the term between witches and Catholics. You were either a Catholic or you were a witch. It didn't matter whether you happened to be a Jew, a person belonging to some other branch of Christianity, a Muslim, a Hindu. You know, if you weren't a Catholic, you were automatically a devil worshipper.
Well, it's just that to a lot of people's minds, when you claim to raise devils and demons and shall we say worship malefic gods and appear sometimes naked and allege to sacrifice animals and some of the bizarre things that parent associated.
Well, the Jews always sacrifice animals in the Jewish religion.
Yes, but they don't any longer.
Maybe not in this country.
And when you appear in derelict houses and graveyards and places like this, performing ceremonies of a nature which might be described as dubious, to say the least, is it not reasonable that some people might think this is black magic and Satanism in practice?
Well, people could say anything. A lot of people say things about the Catholic Church and practicing their rituals without knowing anything about it, such as all Catholics eat fish on a Friday, which is complete bollocks. You know, so if people don't fully understand what somebody else is doing, then a misinterpretation can be indeed placed upon it.
Well, particularly when they support and practice the idea of killing animals as homage or sacrifice to a malefic deity.
Well, who's to say it's malefic? You know, certainly the Jewish God and the Christian God is all for fire and brimstone. And there's not a great deal of difference.
Well, can there be any doubt that the face above the altar in Farron's room, shortly before he was arrested, the one that was painted directly onto the wall, bear a strong resemblance to either the devil or Count Dracula, or both, that certainly could be thought of as being benign.
No, I certainly agree. I didn't understand why he should have that picture there. whether he got somebody else to paint it for him and it wasn't what he wanted.
Did he ever suggest to you that it wasn't what he wanted?
Yes, he did suggest that he rather preferred the first type of picture, the one that had caught fire, Bacchus. He always referred to the Greek god Bacchus. He claimed that his branch of witchcraft had nothing to do with the French god Cernunnos or any of the Celtic gods such as Ogma, Lugh. He was to do with his Wicca was in fact La Vecchia Religione, the old religion, as it comes down from Italy, and that he worshipped the god Bacchus, and that his rites were the same as in ancient Greece and Italy hundreds of years ago. But certainly I've never come across anything he used. He used a lot of Arabic. There was certainly a lot of Arabic stuff.
In his summing up at the end of the notorious Farrant witchcraft trial in '74, Judge Michael Argyle talked of frightened witnesses. He said that they feared the accused man, Farrant, and his talk of black magic. Farrant, it is said, boasted that no jury would dare to convict him, but they did. And he actually named John Pope, this is the judge, a former follower of Farrant, and I'm now quoting the Sun, 26th of June 1974. John Pope, a former follower of Farrant, is named as one of the scared people. The judge is quoted as saying, he became very frightened of Farrant. He feared he might have some kind of power over him.
This is complete nonsense. I know the judge came up with a number of things like that, and it was invented by the police inspector, Trim, who interviewed me, but I never at any time claimed this. I claimed that the Inspector Trim kept asking me questions about heads that had disappeared from bodies. And eventually I know that somebody else claimed to have actually taken the head and the body, and that Farrant was cleared of that charge. And that I knew nothing of this. I said that we had discussed, did anybody have a real skull? And he said no, nobody had ever come across one. And we discussed having various plastic ones, and he said that he believed a plastic skull was in the possession of another temple in Barnet that he knew about. But this was many years before this was in September 1973, long before the body was ever taken from the, and before I ever knew that Helen was connected with the temple up at Barnet, which he was referring to. So this actually took place before the body in the car incident altogether.
But the body in the car incident, in any case, was the charges relating to that were dropped.
Yes, but it was that which Trim interviewed me for. It was that which I was asked to talk about in court.
Why do you think they had the impression, and it seems to be the impression of the police and the judge, that you were frightened of Farrant, and that you feared he might have some sort of power? Why do you think they gained that?
Well, because Trim told them, Trim put a lot of stuff in the statements which I was asked about in the court of the Old Bailey, which were completely untrue. Stuff that I'd never even said. I was never asked to sign anything or write anything down for Trim. They asked me a lot of questions which he made notes about.
So you're saying that a detective inspector simply made that up?
Well, he changed things to suit himself. He changed from we discussed whether anybody he knew had actually had a real skull. This is long before I met Marion Unsworth, who has, and Dave Farrant, who had, Dave married who had a real skull, both at their places, but we discussed if we knew anybody that had a real one and whether they could be used long before, and it was brought up again after the body in the car case, and we all agreed that we didn't know anybody who had one, and that well, that's all that was said.
Frightened or not,
whether we thought they were of any practical use in magic, and I said I didn't know that they were, only that I'd heard that in Africa, African magicians used them with a pendant that swung between the two skulls, and this was all told to the police, but they, the way they wrote it down was this: we really did have a skull, And they came and searched my house, thinking I had the skull. Yes. And then they tried
have a warrant?
I believe so. Yes.
The time is 12:25 on the 18th of October 1987. At this point, John Pope switched off the cassette tape recorder. Why did you do that, John?
I used to have a rest, have a drink and a smoke.
Right. So, just to complete this section of what was and still is regarded as an infamous career, as Parent began his prison sentence in 1974, your rise to fame took off. You were seldom out of the headlines, either locally or nationally.
That's true.
And upon his release, a couple of years later, when he was allowed out on parole, it would appear that you set out to usurp him with a challenge to what is described here as a black magic duel in Highgate Wood. And I am now quoting the Borehamwood Post, but it was to appear elsewhere, not least of all in the Daily Mirror the day after the event, which was Halloween 1976. And on that occasion, you were greeting your former associate with a duel of power on the edge of a football pitch in Highgate Wood. The time is exactly 12:30 p.m. on the 18th of October 1987. We're continuing the interview with John Pope, and I was, before quoting the Daily Mirror, coverage of the notorious black magic duel between John Pope and David Farrant in Highgate Wood, where it says they cast evil spells, they called down terrifying curses, they mumbled and they gabbled as they celebrated Halloween by trying to eliminate each other, to clash to decide who should be the boss of the occult. Would you like to elaborate for me what did transpire and what you did manage to do?
Well, it's true that we got together to decide who was really the most powerful magician in England, and who was right to consider themselves the top magician, rather than just who should be run, King of Witches or possibly Cult, because Alexander's claims to be one King of Witches, and there are quite a few others who claim to be leaders, but they're all really leaders of their own sort of organisations. And this was really the main reason we sort of got together on that occasion. But Mr. Farrant didn't appear to attempt to do anything to demonstrate whether he had any powers or not. And he left it all to me to do. And he kept trying to banish whatever I was invoking. But in the end, another magician came in, said a few words, and distracted Mr. Farrant's attention, and I was then able to work my spell without interruption, in which I conjured a ball of fire.
And what was the outcome of this duel between you and Farrant? What did it decide? What was proven?
Well, I think it actually proved that out of the two of us, I was the only one who actually succeeded in conjuring anything, or demonstrating that we had any powers, and certainly that Mr. Farrant was laughed out of the places, by the reporters and other people present.
In the Boreham Wood Post,
certainly the Queen of the Witches of the North had said that she thought I was had proved that I was the most powerful magician in the country.
in the Boreham Wood Post on the 2nd of June 1977, a full-page feature has you describing yourself as Britain's leading black magician, son of the beast, and that you would like to re-establish a satanic order based on Crowley's teachings. Now, this is in 77.
Well, it's true that I've read a great deal of Crowley and practiced some of Crowley's stuff, but I was basically Kabbalistic and still at that time, and Crowley certainly was, most of his stuff was Kabbalistic, although he had his own system in which he worked things.
What do you mean by Kabbalistic?
Well, it was based largely on the Jewish and Gnostic Christian and religious beliefs and practice using the Kabbalah and working through Hebrew. Although it's true that Crowley used some Latin, some Egyptian in his rites, but most of it was Kabbalistic of some description, certainly based on the Golden Dawn.
Anyway, following your duel with David Farron in 76, did you remain in contact or in association or in conflict with him? What happened?
We certainly remained in conflict. We only met a couple of times after that, really. We met up for a drink once or twice. We met him and some of my people met him, but we've not been on.
Which of your people met David?
I believe there was Count Lombardi, one of my people.
And what did he think to David?
He thought he couldn't magic his way out of a wet paper bag.
He couldn't magic his way out of a wet paper bag. And did anyone else meet?
I'm not sure now. I think some of my other members met him.
And what was the general opinion, if it was general?
Well, that he was a bit of a weed. Certainly that he needed magic to assist him, but it was not thought that he was very up on that. Although I disagree, although I haven't seen any real evidence that David Farron had any psychic powers, he certainly could perform magic through the use of ritual. Like there are many magicians such as David Crawford who are masters of ritual magic that couldn't do anything by the use of their own psychic abilities. They have never developed these. I did at a later date join Mr. Farron's organisation, and he did give me a number of talismans and rituals and things which I found very powerful. One of which I used against Crawford and was enabled me to defeat Crawford, which I may not have been able to do without that. As I say, Crawford was a very powerful ritual magician.
What do you mean by defeating Crawford? What by definition do you mean?
Well,
are you talking about a curse?
Yes, in effect. Crawford attacked me first and sent a
let me
establish
this. This is in what period of time? What year approximately?
About 1981.
So as late as 1981, David Farron was giving you talismans.
Yes.
To assist you with a curse.
Yes.
Which you say worked.
Yes.
And you do not describe this as black magic.
But not when it's used in self-defense.
If it's self-defense and it is malefic, it is not black.
No, black magic is using magic for evil purposes, to go out and to do general harm.
And you were not trying to harm Crawford?
Well, in self-defense.
So
such as the Jewish idea, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
So you were trying to harm Crawford with Farron's assistance?
Yes, I was trying to stop him from harming me.
And you were successful in that respect?
Yes, I was.
What harm befell him?
He lost his job, he lost his wife, he lost his home, and he became very ill. He went to live in France.
And you were still in contact with Edward Barrett in the 1980s.
I had contact with him on a number of occasions. As I said, I joined his organisation, but I haven't seen him for some years. I have spoken to him on the phone, connecting with other people, but I haven't actually been visited him for at least 4 or 5 years now, since the early 1980s.
So would you or would you not be aware of an association that Barrett struck in early 1980 with the French Satanist, Jean-Paul Bourg?
No, I don't know anything about this. I certainly never heard of the French magician, or I certainly, if I had and his name has escaped me, I certainly didn't remember anything about it. I've never met the French.
So you know nothing about it?
No, I know nothing about it.
You are aware that throughout the 70s, and you might not be aware that this was to continue in the 80s, but in Paris with Bourg. Barrett has claimed to sacrifice a variety of animals, usually strays, as he describes them, cats. Do you believe that that actually took place? Because it would seem that a lot of this was to appear in the press. There was scant evidence of it ever being true.
I can't say really. I've never seen the point in sacrificing cats because they're sacred to the Egyptian cat goddess Bast. And actually they are used in self-defense, as can be used, you can call them up to help and defend one. And I can never see the point of sacrificing cats or dogs, which is totally wrong because dogs are associated with Hecate.
Did Barrett ever tell you about ritual sacrifice?
He discussed ritual sacrifice, and certainly he believed that it was okay to sacrifice cats, but then again he had nothing to do with the Egyptian cat goddess Bast. He didn't even know anything about her.
So he openly discussed blood sacrifice with you?
Oh yes.
And he supported it?
Oh yes, yes he did.
Was there anything else he openly discussed with you that might be considered mildly satanic or...
Well, he said he thought that people should cut their own arms and cut and kill animals and dump the blood on themselves, which he discussed, but it's something I've never agreed with. I think it's totally unnecessary to sacrifice animals.
Are you aware of any people around Barrett suffering as a result or consequence of his activities?
Not that I can think of offhand.
I remind you, and admittedly, although the case was before your connection with Barrett, indeed it was the previous year, it was in 72, I remind you of one Victoria Jervis and the alleged witchcraft ceremony in Monk and Hadley churchyard, for which David Barrett was brought before the magistrates and found guilty and an ecclesiastical act. Do you know anything about that? Did you ever hear
Well,
about it?
he talked about it. He said that he believed that it wasn't a pirate buried there, it was a skull and crossbones. He believed it was a Knight Templar buried there, and that he was trying to raise the spirit of the Knight Templar to a particular ritual. But it's well known that there are a number of ghosts in Hadley Church. I've seen them myself, so I've been with other associates.
Were you aware of the
who've
girl
seen them.
with whom he was found and duly arrested?
No, I've never met her.
Did you ever hear anything about her?
Well, yes, I've heard she lived in Barney, that she was rather good looking.
Did you hear of anything that might have happened to her?
She moved out of the area, I was told. That's all.
In the press at the time, not least of all the local press, and I quote, it was said in court that during this midnight ritual in a Barnet churchyard, many newspaper reporters were present. and yet there was no evidence of advertising the event. And on the stroke of midnight, the local constabulary turned up. They had been informed.
Well, it's not a very secluded place as most people think. It is rather well lit, and if something was going on there, most of the people living in sight of the church may well be quite aware of what was happening.
So,
and it's quite possible that somebody rang both the press and the police.
Would you say then that that was an extraordinarily silly thing to do?
Yes, I thought it was.
By someone who claims to be a high priest of witchcraft?
Yes, I thought it was very silly.
Why is it, do you think, that on so many occasions someone who claims to have this or that power seems to exercise little of it in view of the number of arrests and unfortunate, shall we say, circumstances which is before him? Would someone with any power at all have so many disasters, culminating in a 4-year, 8-month prison sentence?
They shouldn't do, not if they're up the highest grade, but a lot of people lower down, ritual magicians, often get themselves into such a muddled state.
So, Mr. Parent, you're saying, got himself into a muddled state?
Yes, and it's happened to quite a few other ritual magicians.
Who, for example?
I certainly Crawford. Certainly Crawford.
Who is Crawford?
Well, he was the Bedford Bedford master of the Bedford branch of the Brotherhood of the Ram.
And what would these be? Black magic?
I've never been able to establish exactly what the organisation did. It did seem very satanic to me, but I've no idea what rituals they performed or anything else. But they did use a ram, a goat or ram, and there was lots of sex rituals where all the women being initiated had to have sex with the ram.
And would you describe that as mildly satanic or black magic?
Oh yes, they certainly worshipped Baphomet. And they had an unusual magic circle at the temple.
What is the significance of worshipping Baphomet?
Well, I couldn't understand their point.
No, what I mean to say is, would that be an indication that the group or covenant or whoever, that if they were worshipping Baphomet, would that suggest to you that they were satanic?
Well, the traditional term Baphomet was used by the Knight Templars and had nothing to do with Satanism. The symbol of the goat with the ram's horns, usually drawn as Baphomet by Levi, was Levi's invention, and when adopted by other groups has often been turned into a satanic image where it was never intended as that in the first place.
But today, if somebody was to have a picture or a model of Baphomet in their altar room, would it suggest to you that they might be satanic?
Yes, so I think few people who really knew anything about Baphomet would ever adopt such an image.
Now, are you aware of Parent's growing obsession over the years with the man who took photographs of him hovering over an open tomb back in 1973, which, although first appearing in Tidbits and I believe elsewhere as well, before he was ever arrested, those same photographs led to his arrest and indeed were used as strongest evidence against him on the charges relating to the interfering with remains and damaging to memorials, etc., which were, some people feel, the strongest charges during his witchcraft. Now, Parent has always protested his innocence over damage and any form of vandalism, and has, through various publications, the press, his own publicity, has always claimed that if he could find the man who took the photographs in the first instance, he would be able to prove his innocence. He uses a pseudonym for this man, and the pseudonym is Hutchinson. The most recent report was in City Limits this year, on the 9th of April. And again, it reports Farrant's battle to prove his innocence, and that he was still trying to find a man called Hutchinson who took the offending photographs in 1973. Now, do you know the identity of Hutchinson?
Well, I'm not sure without having seen the actual photos in question.
They are the photographs of Farrant in a borrowed double-breasted jacket with a tie, which is unusual for him. And they're not terribly well taken, they're not very clear, but they're clear enough to see that Farrant is carrying a very small torch in his hand and is peering into what seems to be a damaged coffin in the terrace catacombs at Highgate Cemetery. These were used in evidence against him. Farrant obviously knew the person who took them. The person who took them obviously knew Farrant.
I've not heard him refer to Hutchinson, and I can't recall those particular photos ever being used in evidence.
Well, they were the strongest evidence actually that we used.
Well, I can't recall them ever seeing those in evidence, or
Well,
ever having seen the photos before. He certainly never showed me any photos.
Well, I doubt that he would have offered them to you, but they have been published. They have been published in
Are they
very...
in your book?
They are not published in the Highgate Vampire, which is my book. The photographs, which one of which was published in my book, relate to a charge for which he was found innocent, and that is the body removed from the cemetery. And those photographs were used in evidence in relationship to that charge. So the photograph in my book, which is of a open coffin, shall we say, and the remains, does not relate to the charges for which he was found guilty, which were interfering with dead remains and offering dignity to them and damaging the memorial.
Well, there were a number of photos shown to me, which were smaller pictures of Farrant in connection with coffins, which I thought were empty, in the section of the catacombs, which is not the columbarium. I'm talking about the catacombs
The terrace
underneath the
catacombs.
church, the terrace underneath the church, the hole in the top being
That's where these pictures are.
and these were taken and shown to me by the man known as Eggman.
Now, let me be absolutely clear on this. The man known as Eggman.
Yes,
This is clearly a nickname.
yes.
Where did the Eggman live?
He lived in Archway Road, almost opposite Farrant. He no longer lives there.
We're really talking about the man referred to by Farrant as Tony.
Yes.
Do you know Tony's second name?
Well, his whole name, both Christian and surname, I understand to be something entirely different. Neither Tony Hutchinson nor Eggman, but it's something entirely different, and I'm not sure whether I should...
Well, I think we've established that Hutchinson is a pseudonym, which Farrant has conveniently employed to mask the true identity of the person he seems to be afraid of revealing for some reason. Now, shall we just remain then with the name Tony? If you wish to reveal any other names, you're most welcome to do so, but in the absence of any other name, we'll simply stick with Tony.
Yes.
Were you aware that Farrant, before he lived opposite Tony in the flat above the toy shop, which is where you first met him,
Yes.
were you aware that previous to that, in fact 3 years previous to that, he was living with Tony and Tony's then first wife?
Yes, I was, yes.
In what circumstances was Farrant living with Tony and his first
Well,
wife?
both himself and Tony both told me that he was living in Tony's cellar.
In the coal cellar?
Yes.
And were you aware, and did they ever discuss it, either one of them or both, that immediately prior to the residence in the coal cellar, which was beneath Tony's flat in Otway Road, in fact, Priestwood mentions, that Tony had ran off or eloped, or whatever term you wish to use, with the first Mrs. Farrant, Farrant's wife of some 12 months, back in 1968.
No, I was not aware of that. I met Farrant's first wife and his children at the Old Bailey with her second husband, I think, and they've been living in Brighton, so I understand. And it certainly wasn't the man that was Tony who she was living with.
Oh no, no. By the time Farrant was living in the cellar, his first wife and Tony had already parted company. It's pretty much established that it lasted 6 months, and those 6 months were quintessentially 68, circa 69. Farrant came into the cellar late 69 and continued into 70.
Yeah.
At the invitation of Tony, having been made bankrupt and evicted from his flat just up the road. You were not aware that Tony, in fact, had cuckolded Farrant and ran off with his wife?
No, I was not aware of that.
Right. Had you heard any stories from anyone, but particularly from Tony or from Farrant, about Tony keeping an altar, a black magic altar perhaps, of some sort in the cellar outside of Farrant's cellar?
No, he always told me that he was a Freemason. He never claimed he had nothing to do with black magic or the occult.
Did he not show any, he showed no interest to you in Crowley?
No, he never showed any. I think he discussed it once or twice, because Crowley did discuss Freemasons. Crowley was the head of the Order Templari Orientis, which was a Masonic organisation. And it is quite possible that he discussed it in connection with the Masonic side.
Would you say that the man known as Tony was an admirer of Aleister Crowley?
Well, he never gave that impression. He may have been wishing to keep it secret, but he certainly never gave that impression.
So, if he was indeed a Crowleyite or a Satanist or anything like that at all, he was a clever one.
He was, yes. He must be, because he never gave any indication.
So unlike Farrant, who was forever, it would appear, seeking publicity, Tony was always avoiding publicity.
Yes, certainly, yes.
What, are you aware of this preoccupation that Farrant has had since he came out of jail, and it seems to be increasing now, with the man he chooses to describe as Hutchinson?
As far as I know, he's never had any connection with him. I don't think he even knows where he lives. I certainly don't know where Tony lives now. And
no, but what I'm asking is, are you aware of Farrant's interest in Tony?
I didn't know he had any interest.
Well, in as much as Tony and Hutchinson are one and the same man.
Yes.
And in as much as Farrant has been, well, only recently published in a magazine, but by no means for the first time, saying that he's been seeking this man for years to prove his innocence, conveniently leaving out the fact that he's known him for a long time and that he knows his identity. Whereas in the press, Farrant is claiming it's a journalist or a photographer who he doesn't know and who took the pictures and then disappeared, and who he didn't know beforehand. So you're not aware of this preoccupation?
No, I'm not aware. He's never discussed that with me.
But then you have lost touch with him in recent years.
Yes. Yes, true.
So, all in all, how would you summarise David Farrand's career?
It's a bit difficult to say. I'd say rather strange actually. It consisted, it seemed to me, of no more than a number of publicity stunts of appearing in the paper, doing this, that and the other, with very mediocre events.
I thought that in witchcraft and so forth, secrecy, to some degree at least, was the quintessence.
Well, people, since it's no longer supposed to be no longer against the laws, it's not strictly true. And that you can belong to almost any religion you want. It's the people decided to come more to the open, to show that they haven't got anything that other people should be afraid of.
Whilst it might be true that witchcraft is not illegal in as much as you can call yourself a witch, and you can belong to any religion, it's certainly true. It's whether or not that religion encourages or permits acts which of themselves are illegal.
Oh yes.
And certainly some of the things which David Farrand has claimed have been illegal.
Yes, sir.
And have got him into trouble, not because they were of a particular religion, so much as the fact that it is quite illegal to enter into certain areas unlawfully, to threaten people, to send death threats through the post, to kill other people's pets. You said you were saying earlier that you would like to elaborate on the Baldry incident, in which both you and Farrand were involved.
Yes, I can't remember for certain the date. I believe it was sometime in September.
Well, to recap, Long John Baldry, the pop singer, who no longer resides in this country, but at the time was living in Muswell Hill, just round the corner to where David Farrand would eventually be living, claimed that Farrand had sacrificed his pet cat called Stoopsy in Highgate Wood. This was, of course, at the incitement of Farrand, who himself did nothing to deny that claim. Perhaps you would like to take it from there.
Well, I thought at the time, I remember that newspapers actually backed up Farrand's claim that he denied actually doing this. Inspector Trim informed me that in his opinion the magic circle painted on the in Highgate Woods and the blood and the knife there found were from beefsteak, and he believed it was all put up by Roger Simpson, that he had found a mummified cat and taken this round to Baldry and claimed it was his cat, dug one up out of Highgate Woods, and that it couldn't possibly have been Baldry's cat. Baldry turned up with another magician, Graham Bond, several times at Farrand's place whilst I was there, and on one occasion Bond made threats towards me in relation to this.
Where
I think he even phoned me up and came to my house.
When you say they came round to where?
To Farrand's place originally.
Which is
above the toy shop.
The rooms above the toy shop in
Yeah.
Archway Road, opposite where Tony used to live.
That's right, yes. They came round there on a number of occasions when I was there, and on one occasion they made threats, well at least Graham Bond made threats towards me in relation to it. And So I wrote a letter in Old English and took it round to Baldry.
What did the letter say?
I don't know the exact word it was.
What was the general theme of the letter?
Well, I pointed out he was dealing with a witchcraft circle, because he wasn't to know I wasn't directly connected with that with parents, but I implied that, and said that he should desist from further, annoying us. He hadn't killed his cat, but if he went on making trouble for me, etc.
Was there anything else which accompanied the letter?
No, I don't think there was with the first letter. It was, he put another article in the paper and there were further threats against myself, and therefore I constructed 2 dolls out of Daz clay, with one picture of Baldry and a picture of Bond on the dolls, which they put in neat little cardboard coffins, gold colour with tassels at the end, and wrapped them in a black and white cloth, black and white cloth, and posted them to him after I performed a traditional voodoo incantation in Creole over them as a curse.
Whose idea was that?
That was my idea to do this. Farron didn't know anything about it. I didn't tell him about it, and I posted these to Baldry. I didn't know Bond's address.
And were you ever to turn up on Baldry's doorstep?
I did on the first occasion when I delivered the first letter to Baldry. I took it round to his place in Buzzell Hill.
But you didn't take a doll inside a coffin with you on it?
No, I don't remember doing so. It was just a letter on that occasion. And I posted the dolls to him. I understand that Graham Bond died as a result of my curse, and that Baldry consulted other sources and found that if he went to live in another country across the sea, as did Crawford, that by crossing the sea the curse could not follow him, as it will not cross water.
So, you're saying that as a consequence of you sending these voodoo dolls?
Yeah, on these occasions they were true voodoo dolls.
To Bond and Baldry. Bond was to subsequently die, and Baldry was to leave the country.
Yeah.
And you say that this is not black magic?
Well, I say it was self-defense against harm that was intended or done to me.
Were they intending harm, do you think?
I think so, yes.
Can you be sure?
There were certainly physical threats made as well as magical threats. They came up the stairs, Clarence Place, and they tried to knock the door down. They were hammering on the door and shouting and were very angry. First of all, they were attempting to see Farron. Then it was thought I was involved by both of them, and they started.
Where was Farron at the time this?
He was out. I don't know where he was at the time, but I was the only one there on this occasion.
So, having now dealt somewhat at length with Farron's brief and certainly disastrous witchcraft career, which certainly these days seems to be at an end, although I don't know whether he still continues as a witch or whatever. Do you?
I don't know for sure if he's actually practicing.
But he hasn't resigned his beliefs.
No, I don't think so. No.
He still proclaims the ancient Wiccan way, as he did.
Yeah. Well, the Lavacia, the Italian, he said there's no resemblance to Gardnerian Wicca, which in my opinion is something Gardner invented himself.
What is it that Farron follows?
Well, he follows the Lavacia Religione, the original Italian.
And where does he get
Bacchus?
Where does he get this from, do you think?
Well, he claimed that it was passed on to him by his mother, who ran the Order of the Blue Moon.
Not the Order of the Black Moon?
No, the Order of the Blue Moon, he always said to me.
Curious. Because prior to the 1970s, nobody, and then I include his wife, especially in the testimony given under oath, nobody can recall Farrant having the least interest in anything.
Well, he did belong to the occult group run by Helen. Back in the 1960s.
This is what Helen claims.
Yeah.
However, Helen's claimed many things which have been proven to be untrue. So that's simply the hearsay of a person who is biased. There is no actual evidence to support any of these claims of Helen's, and the people who are actually privileged to know, and Helen certainly wasn't one of them, Mrs. Farrant was, say that they had no knowledge of any occult interest that Farrant held prior to his trial.
Well, he may have known Tony. He may have well have belonged to Tony's group, the Tony Runner group, earlier, and just been keeping it extremely secret.
Except that Mrs. Farrant was able to testify to the effect that they spent most of their time, he certainly did, and this was well known in the area at the time, he spent most of his time, if not all of his time, in the local pubs, notably the Woodman and the Prince of Wales at that time, drinking, needless to say, the profits of the business of which his wife worked. And sometimes, rarely, but it did happen, and she was present, they drunkenly clambered the wall of Highgate Cemetery at the back, where the church is, and messed about, to use her words, and acted the fool in the cemetery. But under oath, Mrs. Farrant clearly stated that it was just fooling around. There was no...
You didn't have to climb the fence, because there was a gate from the church there at one time, an entrance. So,
yes, but...
And I don't think that entrance was ever locked.
Well, however...
I don't think the gates were ever locked back in the 1960s. I remember as a boy we used to take a shortcut through the St. Michael's Church,
open or shut,
through the cemetery the other side.
Open or shut, they nevertheless entered the cemetery, fooled around, usually in a drunken manner, trying to frighten each other in the dead of night, and left. And that appears, according to the person who after all was living with him, was his wife, that appears to be the sum total of his witchcraft activity, previous to which, it must be remembered, previous to marrying Mary, older than she was in her maiden, Farrant was bumming around, mostly abroad in France, as a bum. And it was whilst bumming around that he met her on the continent in France.
Yes, I remember he told me it was in Spain, he said. He showed me photos of the holiday in Spain.
Well, we can trace Farrant's rather dubious record right back to his school career and being expelled from various schools.
So he worked at Barnet Hospital and had a tobacconist shop up in Barnet. His father was supposed to be quite rich and left him this business.
Well, I don't think he was terribly rich. He left him a sum total of £6,000. Two businesses, one of which was, there was some
it was a baby clothes shop.
No, Farrant leased or bought or leased a baby shop, or baby boutique called the Doll's House, of his own volition, with money given to him on his 21st birthday and as a wedding present. He inherited the tobacconist shop, but there was doubts as to whether he could properly exercise that inheritance, because the estranged wife of his father was laying claim to it. However, it quickly went bankrupt, and that was lost before it almost began. And all that was left was the baby boutique, in which Mary, his wife, worked whilst he drank the proceeds. That was when Mary eloped with Tony in '68, a year after having married Farrant in the previous August 1967. Mary eloped the following year with Tony, and during that 6-month elopement, or running off, the Doll's House went bankrupt and the bailiffs came along. And shortly after that, Farrant was evicted from the flat above where he lived, and it was whilst he was destitute that Tony returned without Mary to his own wife, whom he married, and offered to put up Farrant in his cellar, which I find a very curious and strange invitation. And even stranger for Farrant to accept it.
There was another episode which I've not been able to track down any information on, related after the case in Hadley Churchyard, was that it was recorded in the papers at that time that he was a hospital porter and he lived in Manor House Road, and that somebody very rich, a businessman, had come along and had bailed him out and set him up in his own flat in Manor House Road.
No, or what you're referring to is another charge, which was for being found unlawfully entering an enclosed area, which was August 1970, and at which time Farrant was indeed a hospital porter and was to remain so for some time. Whereupon his friend John Brady, who described himself as a company director, who did not have hardly any money at all, who lived in at that time Manor Road, came along and acted as surety. I don't think it was any money involved. He acted as surety so that Farrant could get out on bail.
Ah, so is that I've heard?
Yes.
He would never go into detail about this. He would, until I asked him, wasn't something he wanted to talk about.
I wouldn't have thought it was.
Well,
just we have to end it correctly. At this time, or shortly afterwards, Farrant did become a hospital porter, and indeed one of the convictions at the Old Bailey was for stealing hospital linen from Barnet Hospital.
I remember that.
And another one was for being in possession of a service revolver and one round.
Silver bullet for shooting werewolves. It's found often claimed. And I think it's also claimed by Inspector Trim.
Farrant claimed
a silver bullet.
Farrant claimed that he possessed a revolver
and a silver bullet for shooting werewolves.
And a silver bullet for shooting werewolves.
Mm.
And you heard him say that?
Yes, he told me about this. I think he even showed me the revolver, but it was many years ago, but I don't remember what. Whether it was a 38 or whether it was a Browning, I can't remember which,
But he told you that his reason for keeping the revolver and what you say was a silver bullet was for shooting werewolves.
Yes, he said he'd been doing that in France. He said he'd hunted werewolves in France.
He'd hunted werewolves. And yet, more recently, he told you, either by writing, however, he told you that he thought vampires was a load of old nonsense.
Werewolves?
No, vampires.
Vampires. I don't remember writing saying he thought vampires.
He didn't write a letter to you where he added a PS and mentioned about vampire trash. Or did you read more recently than in the Advertiser, the local newspaper, where he said that he did not believe vampires were anything but a load of pure fiction, just pure fiction? You missed that, did you?
Yes, I don't remember seeing that.
Oh, that was very
It seems very strange for him to claim that vampires are pure fiction after what he said in the past.
What has he said about them in the past?
Well, he's always believed that vampires always existed. That was his whole idea of the Highgate Cemetery. But Inspector Trim, he seemed to think that apparently...
And there the tape runs out.